Lauren Mitchell had always been a woman who seemed to belong to the world she had built with her own two hands. Born in Houston, she grew up not in the warmth of a family home, but in the corridors of the foster care system. From an early age, she learned that life would not hand her anything easily. While other children had parents to guide them through school projects or cheer them on at graduations, Lauren had caseworkers and temporary guardians who changed every few years. Yet there was a flame in her, something stubborn and unyielding. Teachers would often say she read more books than anyone else in her class. She knew even as a teenager that if she wanted a future that looked different from the world she was born into, she would have to fight for it with relentless determination. By the time she reached college, Lauren had earned herself a scholarship to study business administration at the University of Houston. She spent long nights in the library, working part-time jobs during the day just to keep her head above water. While others partied on weekends, she interned at firms downtown, soaking up every ounce of knowledge she could. Professors admired her discipline, classmates admired her drive, and somewhere deep inside, she carried the quiet pride that she was crafting a destiny no one could take away from her. It was during one of these internships that she met David Mitchell. He wasn't just another professional in a suit. He carried himself with a quiet authority that came from both confidence and experience. David was already on the fast track in the Houston oil industry, working under a respected mentor who had built a formidable energy company from the ground up. He noticed Lauren not only because of her intelligence, but because of the way she carried herself, as though every room she entered belonged to her if she worked hard enough. Their conversations began casually about economics and global energy markets, but slowly shifted into late-night dinners and shared laughter. Their relationship unfolded like something out of a dream. David, 5 years her senior, admired her resilience and her clarity of purpose. Lauren, who had known instability all her life, felt safe for the first time. When David proposed, he promised her not only love, but a life where she would never again feel alone or uncertain. Their wedding was elegant, attended by Houston's elite, and Lauren, in her white silk gown, felt as though she had stepped into a life she once only read about in books. In the years that followed, David rose higher. When his aging mentor passed away, leaving behind not only a legacy, but also a corporation worth billions, David was the one entrusted to take the reins. It was a moment of triumph that should have been filled with pure celebration. The newspapers wrote glowing articles about his vision for the future. Investors flocked to support him, and the Mitchell name became synonymous with power in Houston's oil corridors. Lauren stood beside him at gala dinners and press conferences, always composed, always radiant, the very image of a perfect wife to a powerful man. But Lauren was never content to simply be the wife. She had her own ambitions, ones that had taken root long before she married David. With his encouragement, she opened a boutique in the River Oaks district, Houston's most luxurious shopping quarter. It wasn't just a store, it was a reflection of her taste and her belief that even the smallest details in a home could make life feel extraordinary. Every fabric, every piece of decor she curated carried her touch. Customers adored her eye for design, and soon her boutique became a destination for Houston's wealthiest families. Walking through the polished marble floors of her shop, Lauren felt the satisfaction of knowing she had built something that was hers alone. From the outside, their lives looked untouchable. A sprawling estate on the outskirts of Houston, a fleet of cars, vacations in Aspen during the winter, and the Amalfi Coast in the summer. Photographs of them graced society pages. David in his tailored suits, Lauren in her elegant dresses, both smiling as though nothing in the world could shake their foundation. Friends envied them. Employees respected them, and to the casual observer, the Mitchells were the embodiment of the American dream. Yet beneath the surface, Lauren carried a weight she rarely spoke of. For 6 years of marriage, there had been no children. At first, it didn't worry her. They were both busy, both consumed with building their empires. But as time passed, as friends welcomed their second or third child, The silence in the Mitchell home grew heavier. Family gatherings became delicate affairs, with well-meaning relatives asking when they might finally hear the sound of little feet running across the marble floors. Lauren smiled politely, but every question landed like a stone in her chest. She had visited doctors, undergone every test, and was told there was no medical reason preventing her from conceiving. Still, month after month, nothing changed. David tried to reassure her, insisting they had time, that the right moment would come. But sometimes late at night, when she saw the distant look in his eyes, Lauren wondered if he too carried the same quiet disappointment. The boutique thrived, the company prospered, the wealth grew, but the absence of children became a shadow in their otherwise brilliant lives. And though Lauren never admitted it aloud, there were nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling a gnawing fear she couldn't shake. That perhaps perfection was only an illusion. That beneath the gilded life she had worked so hard to create, a storm was gathering, one that could sweep everything away. Lauren had been looking forward to that afternoon all week. David had promised her they would meet for lunch at his downtown office, a rare break in his relentless schedule. She dressed carefully that morning, choosing a pale blue dress he had always said brought out her eyes, and drove into the heart of Houston with a smile she hadn't worn in weeks. But when she arrived at the glass-fronted skyscraper bearing the Mitchell Energy logo, something felt wrong. The receptionist greeted her warmly, but as Lauren walked past the polished marble lobby and toward David's executive floor, she noticed the unusual quiet. His office was always bustling, assistants moving quickly, phones ringing with the urgency of global markets. Today there was only stillness. Ashley Moore, his young secretary, rose nervously when Lauren entered the outer office. The girl couldn't have been more than 23, with a neat pencil skirt and anxious eyes that darted toward the closed door of David's office. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, her voice pitched higher than usual. I didn't expect you." Lauren smiled politely, masking her growing unease. "David and I had plans for lunch. Is he free?" Ashley hesitated, her fingers twisted around the pen she was holding. He hasn't been in today." Lauren's brow furrowed. "What do you mean he hasn't been in?" "We spoke this morning. He told me he'd meet me here at 12:30. The secretary bit her lip. "I've called his cell half a dozen times. He didn't answer. I thought maybe he was with you." A cold ripple moved through Lauren's chest. David was punctual to a fault. He never missed meetings, never disappeared without explanation. She tried his number herself, listening to the line ring until it cut to voicemail. The sound of his recorded voice, so normal, so ordinary, made the silence that followed feel unbearable. "Unlock his office," Lauren said quietly. Ashley hesitated, then obeyed, sliding the key into the door and stepping aside. Lauren entered, half expecting to see him behind the desk, working late on a contract or taking a call. But the room was empty. Papers lay neatly stacked, the computer screen dark. The chair was pushed in as though he hadn't been there all morning. Lauren forced a smile for Ashley's sake, telling her not to worry, that perhaps David had been caught up in a last-minute meeting. But inside, dread pressed down on her like a lead weight. She left the building quickly, ignoring the curious glances of staff as she strode through the lobby. When she returned home to their estate on the outskirts of Houston, the house was still. The afternoon sun streamed across the marble foyer, glinting on the chandelier. She called out his name, her voice echoing through empty rooms. No answer. His car wasn't in the garage. His phone went straight to voicemail. Lauren went upstairs, her steps quickening as though she could outrun the fear building inside her. In the bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed, pressing her hands to her temples. Something tugged at her then, a memory of slipping her cardigan across her shoulders that morning, of feeling something crumpled in the pocket. She reached into the fabric now, her fingers brushing against a folded piece of paper. Heart pounding, She pulled it out and unfolded it. The handwriting was large, hurried, almost careless. For words stared back at her. Black ink on white paper. Don't look for me. Sorry. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The words blurred. The paper trembled in her hand. She whispered his name, as if he might answer, as if this could be some cruel joke. But the house remained silent, and the note felt heavier than any weight she had ever carried. No, she whispered fiercely, shaking her head. No, he wouldn't do this. Not David. She thought of the man she had built her life with, the one who promised her safety after years of uncertainty, the one who held her hand through every disappointment of not conceiving, the one who never let business get in the way of family dinners when he could help it. That man would not vanish into thin air. He would not leave a note so cold, so final. Tears blurred her vision, but anger surged through her chest, burning away despair. She refused to believe he had walked away. Something had happened, something she didn't yet understand. Her first instinct was to call the police. Within the hour, 2 officers from the Houston Police Department sat in her living room, their notepads open, their voices calm but detached. Lauren handed them the note with trembling fingers, explaining that her husband had disappeared without a trace. The officers examined the paper, exchanged a look, and one of them cleared his throat. Mrs. Mitchell, with all due respect, your husband is a grown man. If he chose to leave on his own, that's not a crime. Lauren stared at them in disbelief. Chose to leave? Do you have any idea who my husband is? He runs a corporation worth billions. He wouldn't just walk away from that. He wouldn't walk away from me. The other officer scribbled something down. We'll file a missing persons report, but given the note, it does look voluntary. We'll check traffic cameras, bank accounts, credit cards. If he's out there spending money or traveling, we'll see it. Their tone was procedural, almost dismissive. To them, she was just another wealthy wife worried her husband had decided on a sudden change of heart. They didn't see the years of loyalty, the empire he had built, the impossibility of him simply abandoning it all. When they left, Lauren sank into the silence of her grand home. The chandelier above glistened, the polished floors shone, but for the first time, the house felt cavernous and empty. She held the note in her hands, staring at the uneven letters, and whispered again to the absent man she loved, "Where are you, David?" In the weeks following David's disappearance, Lauren's life split into 2 demanding halves. By day, she managed her boutique in River Oaks, ensuring that shipments arrived on time, that wealthy clients were treated with the level of service they expected, that the store carried the sheen of effortless perfection. But by night, and often well into the morning hours, she found herself tangled in the affairs of Mitchell Energy, the empire her husband had left behind. The board of directors had been patient at first, offering their sympathy, their polite assurances that David would return soon. But as weeks turned into months, their patience grew thin. Shareholders wanted answers. Partners wanted stability. Lauren, who had always been content to orbit around the company without stepping into its center, suddenly became the only Mitchell still standing in the storm. She leaned heavily on Henry Caldwell, David's longtime assistant and operations chief. Henry had been with the company for more than a decade, known for his loyalty and sharp organizational skills. He was tall, with graying hair at his temples, the kind of man who exuded calm in meetings where tempers ran high. "Let me handle the day-to-day," he told her in his steady voice. "You've been through enough already." At first, Lauren was grateful. Henry attended every board meeting, returned every investor call, and presented himself as the face of continuity. When reporters began circling, eager to sniff out weakness, Henry proposed holding a press conference. Lauren sat in the front row as Henry stepped up to the podium, the company's logo glowing on the screen behind him. Cameras flashed, journalists jotted notes. "Mr. Mitchell has decided to take a personal leave," Henry announced smoothly. "After years of tireless work, he's chosen to step back temporarily to recharge, to focus on his well-being. The company remains in strong hands, and operations continue as normal. The statement was vague enough to pacify the press, yet polished enough to reassure investors. Articles appeared the next day framing David's absence as a deliberate act of self-care, a luxury afforded to men of power. Lauren watched the spin unfold with a mix of relief and unease. She had wanted the world to know something was terribly wrong. Instead, the narrative now suggested David had chosen peace over responsibility. For a while, the strategy worked. Stock prices stabilized, partners kept their contracts, and the board stopped calling her home every night with demands for clarity. Lauren retreated into her boutique, throwing herself into work with a determination that masked her growing exhaustion. She smiled for customers, adjusted displays, and signed invoices while her mind replayed the image of that crumpled note in her hand. But as Henry's presence grew more prominent, Lauren began to notice subtle shifts. His name appeared more frequently in company press releases. He began sitting in David's chair at meetings, leading discussions with the ease of a man who expected authority. Board members started turning to him instinctively for guidance, their questions directed at Henry rather than at the absent Mitchell name. Lauren told herself it was natural. Someone had to steer the ship. Yet late at night, when she returned to an empty bed, she couldn't ignore the way Henry's shadow seemed to stretch larger with every passing week. He wasn't simply holding the fort. He was building something for himself within its walls. Her friends tried to comfort her. At dinners or charity galas, they whispered reassurances that David would return soon. But beneath their polite words, she could sense curiosity, even skepticism. 6 months was a long time. Too long. Whispers in Houston's social circles grew sharper. Had David abandoned her? Had the marriage not been as perfect as it seemed? Lauren carried herself with grace in public, never allowing the mask to slip. But inside, she felt the weight of isolation pressing down with unbearable force. Each morning, she woke in the vast Mitchell estate, listening to silence where laughter used to be. Each evening, she locked the boutique, walking to her car alone, wondering if she looked more like a businesswoman or a widow. The police had little more to offer. The missing persons report remained open, but there were no leads. No credit card activity, no bank withdrawals, no sightings. It was as if David Mitchell had vanished into air, and with every day that passed, the official suspicion that he had left of his own free will gnawed at her sanity. Sometimes, in the quietest hours of night, she would sit in David's study, running her fingers along the spines of his books, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne that still lingered in the leather chair. She would whisper his name into the silence, as though her voice might somehow carry across whatever distance lay between them. But only silence answered back. By the 6th month, Lauren's world had narrowed into a lonely rhythm. Manage the boutique, attend obligatory meetings, stand beside Henry at public events, return home to emptiness. Outwardly, she remained poised, the perfect Mitchell wife. Inwardly, she felt herself drifting closer to widowhood, though no official declaration had been made. And in those quiet moments when she caught her reflection in the mirror, Lauren barely recognized the woman staring back. The woman who had once fought her way out of foster care, who had built a life with sheer determination, now looked like a shadow of herself, haunted, exhausted, and waiting for an answer that never came. Lauren had thrown herself into the boutique with more intensity than ever. If she wasn't overseeing operations at Mitchell Energy, she was buried in fabrics and ledgers, chasing new suppliers to keep her store at the forefront of Houston's luxury scene. One evening, exhausted after a string of meetings, she sat at her desk flipping through a catalog of potential vendors. A glossy magazine slid across her lap, and her eyes caught on a page that made her blood run cold. The image was nothing extraordinary at first glance. A group of rugged men standing in front of a timber mill somewhere in the Canadian wilderness. They wore heavy flannel jackets, gloves tucked into their belts, the kind of picture that usually accompanied articles about sustainable forestry. But in the middle of the group stood a man who made Lauren's heart stop. He looked exactly like David. Her eyes devoured the image. The jawline, the slope of the nose, even the way he carried his shoulders, it was him. She traced the photograph with trembling fingers, reading the caption that named the company, Northern Timber Company, British Columbia. The name beneath the man was Ethan Caldwell. The rational part of her mind screamed that it was impossible. David had vanished 6 months earlier, leaving behind only a cryptic note. Could he have been working here all along, chopping wood in a foreign country? The idea made no sense, but the resemblance was too perfect to dismiss. By the next morning, Lauren had made her decision. She arranged coverage for the boutique, cleared her schedule, and booked a flight to Vancouver. It wasn't impulse, it was desperation. If there was even a chance this man was David, she had to know. The journey north felt surreal. From the warm, bustling streets of Houston, she was carried into landscapes of towering evergreens and snow-dusted peaks. The closer she came to the small town near the logging site, the more her nerves frayed. She rehearsed what she might say if she found him, what she might do if he looked into her eyes and pretended not to know her. The air in British Columbia was sharp and clean when she stepped out of the rental car. The sawmill loomed in the distance, its machines humming, the scent of fresh pine hanging heavy. Workers moved with practiced rhythm, hauling timber, shouting instructions. Lauren's heels clicked against the gravel as she crossed the yard, her presence drawing curious glances. And then she saw him. A man stepped out from behind a truck, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his gloved hand. For a heartbeat, Lauren's knees went weak. It was David, her David, standing in worn jeans and a plaid shirt, his hair a little longer, his face roughened by labor. She opened her mouth, his name trembling on her lips. David! He turned at the sound of her voice, startled, and in that instant she realized her mistake. The eyes staring back at her were the same shape, the same piercing blue, but the expression in them was unfamiliar. Not the recognition of a husband seeing his wife, but the wary confusion of a stranger. "Can I help you, ma'am?" His voice was steady, laced with a Canadian accent. Lauren's chest tightened. She swallowed hard, forcing the words out. You look exactly like my husband." The man frowned. "Your husband? I think you've mistaken me for someone else. Name's Ethan Caldwell." He extended a calloused hand, politely, though suspicion lingered in his eyes. Lauren stared at him, barely able to take his hand. The resemblance was so uncanny it was almost unbearable. You're certain you don't know me?" Ethan shook his head. "Never seen you before in my life. I've lived in British Columbia my whole life. My wife, Hannah, and we've been married 10 years. We've got 3 kids." He gestured toward a nearby truck where a smiling woman waved before climbing into the cab with 2 small children bundled in coats. The sight was like a knife twisting in Lauren's chest. This wasn't David playing some cruel game. This was a man with a family, a history, a life that didn't intersect with hers at all. Still, she couldn't let go of the resemblance. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You look so much like him. His name is David Mitchell. He disappeared 6 months ago in Houston. The police think he left me, but I know that isn't true." For a moment, compassion softened Ethan's gaze. "I'm sorry for what you're going through, but I'm not your husband. My family is right there. You can ask anyone in town. I've been here for years." Lauren nodded numbly, her mind a storm. Logic told her to walk away, to accept the impossibility. Yet something deep inside refused. The likeness was too precise, too absolute. There had to be a reason. As she turned to leave, the sawmill's machinery roared louder, drowning her thoughts. She looked once more at Ethan, who had already returned to work, hefting a log as though nothing unusual had happened. To everyone around him, he was just another laborer in the Canadian wilderness. But to Lauren, he was the ghost of her missing husband, standing alive before her in another man's skin. And as she drove back toward the small inn where she had booked a room, one thought clung to her with relentless force. If this wasn't David, then who was he? And what did his existence mean for the mystery consuming her life? Lauren returned to the sawmill the next morning, unable to silence the questions gnawing at her. Ethan had been courteous but firm the day before, yet she could not walk away without knowing more. He met her outside the small break shack, curiosity written across his face. "You're persistent," he said, leaning against the wooden railing, arms folded across his chest. "I have to be," Lauren replied softly. "You look too much like him. There has to be an explanation." For a long moment, Ethan studied her. Finally, he sighed and motioned for her to sit on the step beside him. "I don't usually share this with strangers, but I'll tell you because you seem desperate to make sense of it. I wasn't born here in Canada. Not really." Lauren's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "I was adopted," Ethan said, his gaze fixed on the forest beyond. "My parents told me I came from Russia, some orphanage in Siberia. I was only a baby when they brought me to Canada. I don't remember anything before them. But I've always wondered, maybe there's someone out there who looks like me. A brother, maybe. A twin." The word hung in the air, twin. Lauren's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments she had never considered before. David had been private about his early childhood. He was raised in Houston, told everyone his parents had passed when he was young, but details were always vague. Could it be possible that somewhere, somehow, his past had been split in two? Ethan glanced at her, reading the turmoil on her face. "If your husband looks like me, maybe that's the answer. Maybe we're connected." He shrugged, but his voice betrayed a quiet weight. "I don't know. I've built my life here. My wife, my kids are my world. But if there's a man out there who shares my face, then maybe there's more to the story than I ever knew." Lauren pressed a hand to her chest, steadying herself. "If you're right, then David didn't just disappear. Someone made sure he did." As if on cue, her phone buzzed in her purse. She answered quickly, relief flooding her when she saw the call came from Houston PD. On the other end, a detective's voice was crisp, professional. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've got some updates regarding your husband's case. The note you handed over, we had it analyzed by handwriting experts." Lauren's grip on the phone tightened. "And it doesn't match your husband's handwriting. Not even close. Whoever wrote that note wanted to make it look like he left voluntarily. But it wasn't him." For a moment, Lauren couldn't speak. The detective continued, explaining that the slant of the letters, the spacing, the pressure of the pen, all pointed to forgery. "We can't tell you yet who wrote it, but this changes things. It means your husband may not have walked away of his own free will." Her heart pounded in her ears. "So you believe me now? You believe something happened to him?" "We believe it's possible," the detective admitted. "But without more evidence, our hands are tied. If you find anything at all, call us immediately." Lauren ended the call, her hands trembling. She stared at the phone, the detective's words echoing in her mind. It wasn't him. The relief was sharp, but so was the terror. If David hadn't written the note, then someone else had staged his disappearance. Someone who wanted her to believe he had left her. She turned to Ethan, her voice unsteady. "It means he didn't abandon me. Someone's hiding him. Someone powerful enough to make him vanish." Ethan frowned, his expression darkening. "If that's true, then you're in the middle of something dangerous. Do you have any idea who could benefit from him being gone?" Faces flashed through Lauren's mind. Board members, competitors, even those within David's own circle. But one face lingered longer than the rest. Henry Caldwell. He had been the one to calm the board, the one to step into David's role without hesitation. But suspicion was slippery, dangerous. She couldn't allow herself to accuse without proof. Instead, she whispered, almost to herself, someone staged it all. They wanted him out of the picture, and I've been blind to it. The weight of it all pressed down on her. The possibility that David had a twin, the certainty that the note was forged, the dawning realization that an unseen hand had orchestrated everything. It was too much, too tangled, too dangerous to grasp at once. Lauren sat beside Ethan, staring at the sawmill workers moving like shadows against the trees. Hope flickered faintly in her chest. David might still be alive. But fear wrapped around that hope like barbed wire. Because if he was alive, then he was in danger. And if she pushed too far, she might be too. In that moment, she felt suspended between worlds. One where her husband had been lost forever, and another where finding him meant unraveling a web she might not survive. Ethan could not shake Lauren's desperation from his mind. That night, after his shift at the mill, he sat at his kitchen table long after his children had gone to bed, scrolling through contacts he hadn't spoken to in years. Among them was a friend from his youth, someone who had returned to Russia to work in rural healthcare. With hesitation, Ethan sent a message, describing Lauren's story and the uncanny resemblance between himself and the missing oil executive from Houston. The reply came hours later, when the morning light was just beginning to filter through the curtains. His friend's words were brief but staggering. "There is a man here, found months ago in the mountains. He looks like you. He is alive, but barely. Come quickly." Ethan read it twice before calling Lauren. Her voice cracked when she answered, weary from another sleepless night. When he relayed the message, silence fell on the line. Then, in a voice trembling with both terror and relief, she said, "Where is he?" Within days, Lauren and Ethan were on a plane again, heading deeper into British Columbia. The journey was grueling, miles of twisting mountain roads, leading them away from the comforts of the city. The hospital was little more than a converted lodge, its walls smelling faintly of pine and antiseptic. Outside, the peaks loomed like sentinels, their snowcaps glittering under the weak winter sun. A nurse led them through dimly lit corridors until they reached a small room at the end of the hall. Machines hummed softly, a monitor beeped in slow rhythm, and there on the narrow bed lay a man Lauren both recognized and didn't. Her knees nearly gave way. David was gaunt, his skin pale against the white sheets. Bruises had faded to yellow along his jaw, and a thin scar traced down his temple. Tubes ran from his nose, and a ventilator wheezed with each forced breath. His chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, not the steady rhythm of a man sleeping peacefully, but the fragile cadence of someone held in place between life and death. "Oh, David," Lauren whispered, pressing her hand to the glass window before stepping inside. A woman in a white coat entered behind them. She was middle-aged, her hair tied back neatly, her expression calm but weary. "I'm Dr. Carter," she introduced herself. "He was found by hikers nearly 6 months ago. He'd fallen in a ravine. Multiple fractures, head trauma. By the time they brought him here, he was barely alive. We've been keeping him stable, but his recovery has been uncertain." Lauren's throat tightened. "He's been here all this time? Alone?" Dr. Carter nodded. "No identification, no one to claim him. Until now." She glanced between Lauren and Ethan, clearly struck by the resemblance. Ethan stepped closer to the bed, his hands trembling as he gripped the rail. "It's like looking in a mirror," he murmured. The doctor adjusted David's fore. "He's been receiving blood, transfusions, periodically. Supplies are limited in facilities like ours. If either of you is a match, it could make a difference." Without hesitation, Ethan rolled up his sleeve. "Test me." Hours later, the results confirmed what Lauren had already begun to suspect. Ethan's blood was a perfect match. More than that, additional testing revealed a genetic link undeniable in its certainty. David and Ethan were not just lookalikes. They were brothers, twins separated at birth, their lives diverging across continents, yet converging in this remote mountain hospital. The weight of it left Lauren dizzy. She gripped the back of a chair, staring at the two men, the one who had been her husband, fighting for his life, and the other who carried his same face, his same blood. Fate had drawn them together in a way she could hardly comprehend. Dr. Carter spoke gently, aware of the storm raging in Lauren's heart. He's stable for now, but fragile. The next few weeks will be critical. There's no guarantee he'll wake, but the fact that he's held on this long, it speaks to his strength. Lauren reached for David's hand, the skin cool beneath her touch. He's strong, she whispered fiercely. He has to be. Ethan, standing beside her, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. If he's my brother, then he's a fighter. We'll see him through this. Every moment in that room was a tightrope between despair and hope. The hiss of the ventilator filled the silence, each mechanical breath a reminder that David's life was suspended by threads both fragile and miraculous. Lauren prayed silently, her lips moving though no sound escaped. She had clung for months to the belief that he hadn't abandoned her, that something darker had torn him away. Now here was proof. David Mitchell had not left her by choice. He had been broken, hidden, nearly erased. And yet, against impossible odds, he had survived. For the first time since his disappearance, hope stirred in her chest. Not the wild hope of denial, but the fragile hope of possibility. Still, with it came fear, sharper than ever, because if someone had tried to erase David, then that same someone might not be finished yet. The weeks that followed were an agonizing vigil. Lauren spent every day by David's bedside, the hiss of the ventilator and the steady beep of the monitor becoming the rhythm of her existence. She read to him, spoke to him, held his hand as though her voice alone could tether him to life. Ethan visited often, standing silently at the foot of the bed, torn between the strangeness of finding a brother and the bond that had already begun to grow. Then one morning, the miracle came. The sound was so small, she almost missed it, a faint rasp of breath that didn't come from the machine. Lauren's head shot up from where she had dozed in the chair. David's fingers twitched against hers. Slowly, painfully, his eyelids fluttered open. "David." Her voice broke as she leaned forward, her tears falling freely now. "It's me. It's Lauren. You're safe." His eyes, clouded with confusion, searched the room. He tried to speak, but the effort brought only a hoarse croak. Dr. Carter rushed in, checking his vitals, adjusting the tubes, her face breaking into a relieved smile. "He's waking," she confirmed. "Give him time." Within hours, David was breathing on his own, weak, fragile, but alive. When his voice finally returned, rough as gravel, the first word he managed was her name, Lauren. She clasped his hand against her cheek, sobbing openly. "I thought I lost you. For 6 months, I thought you left me. But you didn't. You're here." His gaze shifted, landing on Ethan, who hovered uncertainly by the doorway. For a long moment David stared, as though confronting his own reflection. "Who?" Lauren explained in halting words, her voice trembling with disbelief even as she spoke. Ethan stepped forward, his tone gentle. "Name's Ethan Caldwell. Turns out we're brothers. Twins, from what the doctors say." David let out a shaky breath, closing his eyes. "I always wondered, but I never knew." The reunion was overwhelming, but as the haze of sedation lifted, David's expression hardened. He turned back to Lauren, urgency flickering in his weakened voice. "It wasn't an accident." Lauren's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "Henry Caldwell," David whispered, each syllable deliberate, edged with fury. "He told me we were flying to meet with Chinese investors. He arranged the trip, insisted it had to be done in person. But when we were in the air, his men turned on me. They dragged me to the door of the helicopter. I fought them, but his hand trembled as he mimicked the motion. They pushed me out into the sky." Lauren's breath caught. She had pictured his fall 100 times in her nightmares, but hearing it now was unbearable. "How did you survive?" "Trees," David rasped. "I hit the trees. The branches broke the fall. I don't remember much after that. Just cold, pain, and then nothing until I woke up here." Ethan clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "So Henry tried to kill you. Your own right-hand man." David nodded weakly. "He's been working with our competitors for years, feeding them information, undercutting contracts. I confronted him once, told him I suspected. He played innocent, but I found proof. A flash drive, emails, accounts, everything. It was enough to ruin him." His eyes burned with the effort of remembering. "I kept it hidden. He must have known. That's why he tried to erase me." Lauren's mind reeled. The months of uncertainty, the whispers, the forged note. All of it traced back to Henry. He had not only stolen her peace, but nearly taken David's life. "Where is it?" "The flash drive," she pressed, desperate. David closed his eyes, his strength waning. "Hidden. In my study. The bottom drawer, false panel. It has everything." His hand gripped hers with surprising force. "Don't let him win, Lauren. Promise me." Tears blurred her vision as she nodded. "I promise. We'll expose him. He won't take what's ours." Ethan placed a steady hand on David's shoulder. "We'll make sure of it. Together." The room fell into silence then, broken only by the rhythmic beep of the monitor. But the stillness was different now. It was no longer the silence of despair, but the silence before a storm, the gathering of strength, the resolve for justice. For the first time since that terrible day when she found the note in his jacket, Lauren no longer felt powerless. She had her husband back. She had the truth. And she had the proof that could bring Henry Caldwell's empire of lies crashing down. When David was strong enough to travel, Lauren arranged their return to Houston with meticulous care. The private plane touched down at William P. Hobby Airport under a veil of secrecy, escorted quietly by security hired to protect him from the moment they stepped off the runway. For weeks, she had dreamt of this moment, walking back into the city with her husband alive at her side. Now that it had come, her heart pounded with both relief and dread. They went straight to the Mitchell estate, the house that had felt like a tomb for 6 months, now breathing with life again. David insisted on going to his study first. With Ethan's help, he lowered himself into the leather chair, his hand trembling slightly as he unlocked the bottom drawer of the desk. He pulled it open, revealing what looked like a stack of old files. But with a practiced hand, he slid back a false panel. There it was, the small black flash drive that had nearly cost him his life. Lauren's breath caught as David held it up. This is what he wanted to bury. The following morning, they walked into the FBI field office in downtown Houston. Agents ushered them into a secure conference room, their expressions tightening as David explained everything. The helicopter, the betrayal, the months lost in a hospital bed. Lauren slid the flash drive across the table, her hand steady though her pulse raced. The lead agent plugged it into a laptop. Screen after screen, filled with damning evidence. Email chains between Henry Caldwell and international competitors. Bank transfers to offshore accounts. Contracts quietly funneled away from Mitchell Energy. And then the crowning piece, plans outlining the staged disappearance of David Mitchell, complete with a forged note. The agents looked up, their faces grim. "This is more than corporate espionage," one said. "This is attempted murder." By that evening, the arrests began. Henry Caldwell was pulled from his downtown office in handcuffs, his face pale with shock. Reporters swarmed the building, cameras flashing as the man who had once played the loyal lieutenant was shoved into the back of a black SUV. Ashley Moore, the secretary whose nervous smile had once greeted Lauren in the office, was arrested hours later. Faced with the evidence, she broke quickly, admitting that Henry had coerced her into writing the note. He had promised her promotions, power, a place at his side once David was gone. Her handwriting had been the perfect disguise, a tool to convince Lauren the abandonment was real. The betrayal cut Lauren deeply. She remembered the young woman's trembling hands, the way she had avoided eye contact. Now she understood. Guilt had been etched into every glance. The story exploded across the media. Corporate coup attempt foiled, headlines read. Trusted executive betrays oil magnate. Investors who had once doubted now watched in awe as David Mitchell returned, alive, armed with proof, and ready to reclaim what had been stolen from him. Days later, a press conference was called. The ballroom of a downtown hotel filled with journalists, cameras, and investors who had traveled from across the country to see, for themselves, the man many had assumed was dead. Lauren stood just behind the curtain, her hand clasped tightly in David's. He still looked pale, thinner than before, but the steel in his gaze was unmistakable. When he stepped onto the stage, the room erupted in flashes of light, the hum of voices rising before falling into silence. David gripped the podium, his voice firm despite the months of weakness. 6 months ago, I was betrayed by someone I trusted. Henry Caldwell attempted to take my life and my company. He failed. Today, thanks to the work of law enforcement and the unwavering support of my wife, justice is being served. Lauren felt tears sting her eyes as she listened, her heart swelling with pride. She had waited for this moment, for the truth to be spoken aloud, for the world to see that her faith in David had not been misplaced. He glanced back at her, then continued. This company was built on integrity and resilience. That will not change. To those who tried to undermine us, let this be clear. We are still here, stronger than before. And justice will prevail. Applause thundered through the ballroom, echoing off the chandeliers. Reporters shouted questions, but David raised a hand, his expression calm. I will not be commenting further until the trial. What matters now is that the truth has come to light, and that truth will not be silenced. Lauren stepped onto the stage then, taking his hand. Together, they faced the cameras, the room buzzing with energy, the world outside watching. It was not just the return of a husband or the vindication of a wife. It was the restoration of everything Henry Caldwell had tried to destroy. And as the flashes lit their faces, Lauren knew this was only the beginning. Justice had been set in motion, and nothing would stop it now. The trial came swiftly, the weight of evidence leaving little room for doubt. In the packed courtroom of Harris County, Henry Caldwell sat stiffly in a dark suit, his once proud posture now hollowed by the inevitability of his fate. Witness after witness spoke, emails and bank records were projected onto screens, and finally, David himself took the stand. His voice, though quiet, cut through the silence like a blade. Henry Caldwell wasn't just a traitor to me or to this company, David said firmly. He was a man willing to sell loyalty for greed, to gamble human life for his own ambition. The jury deliberated for only a short time. Their verdict was unanimous. Guilty on multiple counts: attempted murder, conspiracy, and economic espionage. The judge's sentence was severe: decades in federal prison, a life spent behind bars instead of boardrooms. For a man who once dreamed of power, it was the ultimate humiliation. Ashley Moore's fate was less dire, but no less devastating. She struck a deal with prosecutors, confessing to her role in forging the note and cooperating against Henry. In exchange, she avoided the harshest charges, but her career was shattered. Her name appeared in every headline, not as the ambitious young professional she had once aspired to be, but as the secretary who betrayed her boss's wife for empty promises of advancement. By the time the trial ended, no company in Houston would hire her. She disappeared from the city, her reputation in ruins. For Lauren, the closure was bittersweet. Watching Henry led away in handcuffs and Ashley reduced to a cautionary tale brought a measure of satisfaction. But no victory could erase the months of fear and loss. What it did bring was a renewed gratitude for survival, for truth, for the bond she and David had fought to reclaim. Back at the Mitchell estate, life slowly returned to its rhythm. David's health improved, his strength rebuilt with time and care. Ethan became a frequent presence, sometimes bringing his wife and children to visit. The resemblance between the brothers never ceased to amaze anyone who saw them together. Yet what struck Lauren most was the contrast. Two lives that had begun in the same place but diverged so completely. The truth of their connection was confirmed not just by the hospital's genetic tests, but by a private investigator Lauren had hired. Digging through international adoption records, the investigator pieced together the story. Twin boys born in a Russian orphanage, separated in infancy, each adopted into different worlds. One had grown up in Houston, destined for business and power. The other in British Columbia, grounded in forests and family. Fate, in its strange way, had woven them back together when the world threatened to tear them apart. The brothers embraced their reunion with open hearts. Over long dinners, they compared memories, discovered shared quirks, even laughed at how their children favored the same games and foods. In time, the idea of building something together emerged, not just a bond of blood, but a partnership of purpose. With David's recovery and Ethan's expertise in timber, the families launched a joint venture, a company bridging the oil corridors of Texas with the forestry traditions of Canada. It was not just about profit, but about legacy, about proving that what had once been broken could be rebuilt stronger. Investors admired the symbolism. The media called it a tale of resilience. For Lauren, it was simply a sign that healing was possible. On a cool spring evening, the Mitchell estate overflowed with laughter. Children ran across the lawn, Ethan's kids chasing each other while David and Lauren watched from the porch. Ethan sat nearby, his arm around his wife, their faces lit with the golden glow of sunset. For the first time in a long time, the house felt alive, not with the sterile perfection of wealth, but with the warmth of family. Lauren leaned her head against David's shoulder, her voice soft. "We almost lost everything." David kissed her hair, his eyes fixed on the children. "But we didn't. We found more than we ever imagined." In that moment, Lauren understood what had been true all along. Money could vanish, reputations could be tarnished, empires could crumble. But family, the ties of loyalty and love, was the only wealth that truly mattered. The storm had passed, but its lessons would never leave her. She had learned that resilience was not the absence of fear, but the strength to endure it. That betrayal could wound, but it could not erase trust when it was anchored deep. And that sometimes the greatest revenge was not destruction, but survival, living well, living fully with those who stood by you. As the sun slipped below the horizon and the sky turned to twilight, Lauren felt peace settle over her for the first time in months. The nightmare was behind them. Before her stretched not just the promise of tomorrow, but the certainty of a family forged through fire, unbreakable and true. I was standing by the gift table, holding a baby blanket I'd spent 2 weeks crocheting, when my younger sister tapped her glass and said, "I have something to tell you all." The room quieted instantly. Dozens of faces turned toward her, some curious, others already bracing for drama. But no one, not even I, could have expected what came next. Sabrina Carter was glowing, 8 months pregnant, wearing a silky pale blue maternity dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She looked every bit the center of attention. The decorations in our parents' living room were ridiculous. Pink and blue streamers, a towering diaper cake, and party games that had already dragged on too long. But this was the crescendo. She placed one hand on her belly, looked directly at me and said, "The father of this baby is Noah Monroe." There was a moment of pure silence. Not shock, silence. And then it hit me. Gasps, murmurs, chair scraping. I couldn't breathe. Noah Monroe. My husband. My dead husband. My heart dropped so hard it felt like it cracked something inside me. I gripped the edge of the table just to stay standing. I wanted to scream, to laugh, to fall through the floor. Instead, I stood there frozen as Sabrina continued. her voice clear, rehearsed, and disturbingly proud. "Since this baby is Noah's only child," she said, "I have the right to half of everything he left behind, his estate, his accounts, his downtown apartment. My child deserves his legacy. Half of everything. Half of the $12 million my late husband left behind after building a tech firm from scratch. Half of the home we lived in together. Half of the life I had been trying to hold onto since he died." I looked at my parents, expecting at least some trace of confusion or outrage. But their faces, they weren't surprised. My father's mouth was tight, arms crossed. My mother was holding Sabrina's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. They knew. They already knew. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My body was shaking so violently I had to press both palms against the table. The blanket in my hand slipped to the floor. Sabrina turned to me with that infuriating half-smile she always wore when she got exactly what she wanted. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said, her tone syrupy sweet, "but you deserve to know. And so does everyone else." The room was spinning. My skin felt hot and cold at the same time. I backed away slowly, then bolted through the crowd, bumping shoulders and knocking over a plate of cupcakes without even noticing. Someone called after me, maybe my mom. I didn't turn around. By the time I reached my car, I was crying so hard I couldn't get the key into the ignition. The sound of my heartbeat pounded in my ears like war drums. I finally drove off, the blanket still on the floor behind me, party decorations fading in the rearview mirror. I didn't know what hurt more, that Noah had betrayed me, that my sister had done this, or that my parents had stood behind her with pride. But what I did know, even in that moment, was this: whatever they'd started, I was going to finish. The drive home was a blur of taillights and tears. I couldn't remember the turns I took or the traffic lights I ran. When I finally pulled into the driveway of the house Noah and I once called home, I sat in the car for nearly 20 minutes, unable to move. Everything inside me felt broken, twisted in a way that would never be the same again. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just sat on the edge of the bed staring at the photo of our wedding day. His smile so wide, his hands around my waist like I was the center of his world. I traced the outline of his face with my finger and whispered, "Why?" At 2:13 a.m., my phone lit up. It was Sabrina. A photo. Noah and Sabrina. In a hotel room, his arms around her waist. Her phone in the mirror, capturing the kiss. My stomach turned so violently I barely made it to the bathroom in time. When I came back, another message was waiting. Another photo, this time at a restaurant I didn't recognize, their fingers intertwined across the table, smiling like they didn't just destroy someone. Then came the texts. "I don't love her anymore. After the divorce, we'll tell everyone. I want a life with you and our baby." Each one landed like a hammer to the chest. Each one chipped away at the version of Noah I had believed in, loved, cried for, mourned. The timestamp stretched back 6 months. During that same time, I had been injecting hormones, crying in sterile clinics, blaming myself for every negative pregnancy test. I remembered the way Noah would hold my hand during appointments, tell me not to stress, promise we'd try again next month, all while sneaking away to hotels with my sister. At 4 a.m., I found myself in the nursery we'd started to prepare before giving up. The paint samples were still taped to the walls. The crib was half assembled, gathering dust. I sat on the floor and stared at the tiny shoes I had bought out of hope. Now they looked like artifacts from another life. My phone buzzed again. "I know this is hard," Sabrina had written, "but we can make this work. You and I are still sisters. That baby is your blood too." I didn't reply. I couldn't. Instead, I deleted every message and threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a sharp crack, the sound echoing through the empty hallway. I didn't even check to see if it broke. That night, something in me began to shift. The grief was still there, sharp and raw, but under it, something darker had started to bloom. Resolve. They wanted to drag me into their lie, force me to play along. hand over half of Noah's legacy to a child I had no reason to trust. But I wasn't going to crumble the way they expected. They thought they knew me, thought I was too soft, too obedient, too desperate for their approval. They were wrong. At exactly 6:04 a.m., the phone rang again. I had just managed to close my eyes for the first time all night when the screen lit up with Mom. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. A minute later, it rang again, Dad. I answered on the third call, half out of habit, half because something in me wanted to hear their excuse. What I got instead was strategy. Valerie! My father's voice was firm, emotionless, like he was reading from a memo. You need to be reasonable. Sabrina's child is entitled to a portion of Noah's estate. The sooner you agree to divide the assets, the easier this will be for everyone. Easier for who? I said, my voice hoarse but steady. For you? For her? For all of us, my mother chimed in, and that's when I realized they had me on speakerphone. I sat up slowly. When did you know? There was silence on the other end. That heavy, damning silence that only ever means guilt. Then my mother's voice, soft, like a confession she didn't want to own. We've known for a while. Noah told us, maybe 7 months before the accident. 7 months. They had known for 7 months. They let me hold Noah's cold hand at the funeral. Sobbing into a dress, Sabrina helped me pick. They hugged me when I couldn't stop crying. They sat at my table every Sunday eating the meals I cooked, sipping wine I paid for, all while carrying the secret. And still they took my money. Every month. $3,000 wired automatically into their account because I believed naively that we were rebuilding something. That losing Noah had softened them. That for the first time in decades they actually saw me. I laughed. A short, dry sound that cracked the stillness of the room. You're disgusting, I said. All of you. My dad scoffed. Watch your tone, young lady. You think this is easy for us. No, I snapped. I think this is exactly who you are, and I'm the idiot who kept hoping you'd change. I hung up and immediately opened my banking app. I deleted the recurring transfer in 2 taps. It felt surgical, clean, like cutting off a tumor. Let Sabrina take care of them. Let their golden girl pay their bills with her non-existent smoothie business and half-finished life coach certification. Let her feed them lies along with whatever leftovers she scrapes together in that dingy apartment across town. As for me, I was done pretending I still belonged to that family. That night, I packed up a box of Noah's things, his watch, his favorite hoodie, the framed photo from our honeymoon, and shoved it into the back of the closet. I couldn't look at him anymore. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I knew this much. The next time they came for me, they'd find a different woman waiting. 3 weeks passed. I didn't hear from my parents again. Not directly, at least. But Sabrina? She was relentless. At first it was more photos, then voicemails, some sad and trembling, others sharp with entitlement. I stopped listening. I stopped looking. I stopped feeling, until the letter came. Thick envelope, formal font, a law firm I didn't recognize. I opened it on the kitchen counter, the same spot where Noah used to cut vegetables while humming under his breath. My fingers trembled. Inside was a copy of the legal complaint. Sabrina Carter, plaintiff, filing for a 50% claim to Noah Monroe's estate on behalf of her unborn child. It used the word voluntarily in describing the division she expected from me, but it read like a threat. The letter said I had 10 days to respond. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked to the sink, turned on the cold water, and let it run over my wrists until the numbness crawled back up my spine. Then I pulled out my laptop and started looking for an attorney. I didn't need a bulldog. I needed a surgeon. Someone who could dismantle a lie without missing a single cut. It took 4 days, 5 consultations, and 1 phone call that ended with me slamming the laptop shut in tears before I found Marcus Kellerman. His office was small, lined with law books and silent trophies. He listened carefully, taking notes with a fountain pen, not interrupting once. When I finished talking, he looked up and said, Your sister's going to regret putting this on paper. But she has proof, I said. Photos, texts my parents will testify. He nodded, his face unreadable. They'll make the court sympathetic, especially since she's carrying a child. Judges don't like leaving babies out in the cold. So I don't stand a chance. I didn't say that. He flipped a page in my file. I said she'll make the court sympathetic. But sympathy doesn't override fact. And truth has a funny way of surviving the mud. I exhaled just barely. Marcus agreed to take the case. Told me to forward every text, every voicemail, every email. We would build a timeline. Reconstruct Noah's assets. Review the trust and its contingencies. He was calm, precise, and expensive. I didn't care. That night, as I prepared the documents he asked for, my phone buzzed again, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in me paused. I answered. Is this Valerie Monroe? A woman asked. Her voice was calm, controlled, but underneath it, something cracked. Yes. Who's calling? I'm Evelyn Monroe, she said. Noah's mother. The world tilted again. I reached for the countertop like I had during the baby shower, my knees suddenly soft. I was told she died. There was a pause. Noah told you that, she said. He lied. About many things. And if you're willing, I think it's time you knew the rest. We met the next morning at a small cafe tucked between a florist and a consignment shop downtown. I got there early, more from nerves and punctuality, and sat in the corner booth furthest from the door. My coffee cooled untouched. My fingers wouldn't stop shaking. When Evelyn Monroe walked in, I recognized her instantly, not because I had seen her before, but because she looked like Noah. The eyes, the posture, even the way she moved, graceful but guarded, was him. For a second, my throat tightened and I had to look away. She sat across from me, setting her leather bag gently on the seat beside her. No makeup, hair pulled into a simple twist. A woman who didn't come to impress, only to be heard. I was at the funeral, she said softly. Back row. Black veil. I left before the service ended. I didn't think I had the right to mourn him publicly. I remembered her now, a quiet figure in the shadows that day, one I'd chalked up to distant family or neighbor. I never imagined. He told me you were dead, I whispered. Evelyn's lips pressed together, not in anger. Something sadder, something older. Noah had his reasons for cutting ties. They weren't all unjustified, but lying about my death, that was cruel even for him. I looked at her then, really looked. There were years of pain in her face, a woman who had survived more than just her son's betrayal. I heard what your sister's doing, she said, pulling out a worn envelope from her bag. And I can't stay silent. Not again. She slid it across the table. Inside were hospital records. Hartford General, dated 11 years ago. I scanned the pages, my pulse pounding louder with every line. Complete azoospermia. Permanently sterile. No natural conception possible. The words blurred for a second as my vision fogged. I had to reread them. This isn't possible, I muttered. We spent years trying to have a baby. Fertility specialists, hormone injections, tracking cycles. He held my hand through every appointment. He knew, Evelyn said gently. He got the diagnosis at 26. He was devastated. It was the last thing we ever talked about before we stopped speaking. A part of me crumbled right there in that booth. The grief, the guilt, the months I spent thinking something was wrong with me, they all unraveled into a new shape, rage. I had lived in silence, blamed my body, begged the universe for something no one knew would never happen because he'd already decided I didn't deserve the truth. Evelyn reached across the table, her hand soft and trembling. I know it doesn't undo the betrayal, but if Sabrina's child isn't his, you deserve to know, and the court needs to know. I nodded slowly. Would you be willing to take a DNA test? If they ask for confirmation. I came prepared for that, she said. I'm not afraid of the truth anymore. For the first time in months, something inside me shifted. Not peace, not yet, but clarity, the kind that steadies you after a long, disorienting storm. I left that cafe with the envelope pressed to my chest like armor. Noah had built a house of lies, but I was done living in it. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in energy, the kind of cold that sinks into your skin and settles in your spine. I sat at the defendant's table, eyes locked straight ahead, trying not to look at the woman sitting just a few feet away from me. My sister, Sabrina Carter, wearing a black wrap dress, minimal makeup, and an expression of polished grief. She held the baby in her arms like a shield. My parents were behind her. My mother's hand rested on Sabrina's shoulder, while my father leaned forward with quiet intensity, the kind he used to reserve for job interviews and tax audits. Across the aisle, Marcus Kellerman flipped through his notes, calm and meticulous as always. "She's rehearsed," he said under his breath. "But truth doesn't need rehearsal, just timing." When the judge entered, everyone stood. The sound of heels and polished shoes against linoleum echoed like gunfire. Opening statements came and went. Sabrina's attorney painted a heartbreaking picture: a widowed sister, pregnant with the only child of a man gone too soon. She spoke about legacy, about responsibility, about family. She even cried on cue. And then it was her turn to speak. Sabrina walked to the witness stand, the baby cradled in her arms like a trophy. Her voice quivered just enough. "Noah loved me. We didn't mean for it to happen, but sometimes love doesn't ask for permission. We were planning to tell Valerie after the divorce." She dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "All I want is what's fair for our child. He deserves his father's name, his home, his inheritance." The judge nodded, neutral. "Thank you, Ms. Carter. Mrs. Monroe, your counsel may proceed." Marcus stood slowly, adjusting his tie. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe that Ms. Carter's claims are not only misleading, but entirely false. We request that this court consider medical documentation relevant to Mr. Monroe's reproductive health." He handed a sealed folder to the bailiff, who brought it to the bench. The judge skimmed through the contents, her face unreadable. "Where did this come from?" Sabrina's lawyer demanded. "From Mr. Monroe's biological mother, Evelyn Monroe," Marcus replied, turning toward the back of the courtroom. "Who is present and willing to testify." Gasps rippled across the room. Sabrina's head snapped up. Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time that day, her composure cracked. Evelyn stood. She looked older than she had at the cafe. Perhaps it was the lighting or the gravity of the moment, but her voice was clear. "Your Honor, I'm here to provide a DNA sample. If this child is my grandson, I will not stand in the way of his rights. But if he is not, the truth deserves to be known." The judge nodded once. "DNA testing is hereby ordered. This court will reconvene when results are available." Sabrina looked like she was about to faint. Her skin had gone pale. She clutched the baby tighter, then turned toward her mother with panicked eyes. But for once, there was no comfort there, just quiet confusion. As the gavel struck and everyone began to rise, I remained seated for a beat longer. I wasn't shaking anymore. For the first time in months, I felt still. The courtroom was silent when the judge returned with the envelope. I could hear the faint rustling of papers, the baby's soft breathing, and somewhere behind me, a woman whispering a prayer under her breath. Sabrina sat rigid, her arms wrapped around the sleeping child. Her face was a mask, composed but too still. The judge cleared her throat. "These results confirm," she began, eyes scanning the room with clinical precision, "that there is no genetic match between the child in question and Mrs. Evelyn Monroe. Therefore, the court finds that Noah Monroe is not the biological father of the child." A sharp gasp escaped from someone in the gallery. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father sank back in his seat, eyes wide and unblinking. But it was Sabrina's face that held me. For the first time, there was no performance. No smug smile. Just collapse. She shook her head once, slowly, then again, faster, like she could rewind the moment by sheer force of will. "That's not possible," she said, her voice barely audible. "No, those records are fake. She faked them. She made it all up." The judge held up a hand. "Ms. Carter, sit down." But Sabrina wouldn't. She stood now, clutching the baby with one arm and waving her other hand in the air like a drowning swimmer reaching for a lifeline. "I was seeing someone else," she blurted, her voice cracking. "Okay, I was seeing more than one person when Noah died. But I thought it had to be him. He had the most to leave behind." The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, the shifting of bodies. My parents looked like statues, pale, silent, hollow. The judge raised her voice over the noise. "Let the record show that Ms. Carter admits to knowingly deceiving this court and the defendant with fraudulent claims. This court rules in favor of Valerie Monroe. All claims to the estate filed by Ms. Carter are permanently dismissed." The gavel dropped like thunder. Just like that, it was over. Sabrina sank back into her chair, her makeup streaked with tears, holding a child who had no idea he'd just lost everything his mother had tried to steal. The lie collapsed under its own weight. And the truth, it stood quietly in the light. Outside the courtroom, I stepped into the sun like it was the first time I'd seen it in months. Evelyn was waiting by the curb, a hand on the door of her car. When she saw me, she didn't say anything, just opened her arms. I didn't hesitate. We stood like that for a long time. I had walked into that courthouse with grief, betrayal, and a mountain of doubt, and walked out with something unexpected. Not revenge, not justice, just freedom. My parents caught up to me in the courthouse parking lot. My mother's cheeks were streaked with tears, her eyes bloodshot and searching. My father looked smaller, not just older, but diminished somehow, like the air around him had been pulled away. "Valerie," she whispered, reaching for my hand. "Sweetheart, we didn't know. We didn't know she was lying." I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I pulled out my phone, pressed 3 buttons, and held it up so they could see. Their names. Blocked. Permanently. My mother gasped. My father didn't say a word. "I warned you," I said quietly. "You chose her. And now you live with that choice." Then I turned and walked toward Evelyn, who was waiting by her car, one hand shielding her eyes from the sun. She opened the door, but paused when I approached. "You okay?" she asked. I surprised us both by laughing. Not out of joy, but something close to peace. "I think I will be." We stood there for a moment, watching the people spill out of the courthouse behind us like they were leaving a theater, as if our lives were just a show that had finally reached its final act. I reached into my purse and pulled out a keyring. One key. Silver. Smooth edges. "This is for the apartment," I said. "Downtown. The one Noah left me. I never liked it. Too many ghosts. But maybe you'd like it." Evelyn froze. "Valerie, no. I couldn't. You gave me the truth," I said. "You gave me back my life. Let me give you this." She cried, quietly, the way women cry when they've been strong for far too long. Il était hol aimé. It was the safest I'd felt in years. A week later, I signed over the deed. She called it too generous. I called it balance. Since then, I've started building a life that's mine. Not inherited. Not constructed from Noah's shadow. Mine. I went back to work full-time. Marcus introduced me to his wife, who got me into a hiking club. I hated it the first few weeks. Mud, sweat, the blisters, but there was something about climbing a hill alone and standing at the top that made everything below feel manageable. I took a solo trip to Vermont, rented a cabin. No cell service, no expectations. Just me, a stack of old books, and the sound of wind through trees. I cried one night, then slept 12 hours straight. It was the best sleep I'd had since the funeral. Sabrina sent a letter last month. handwritten. The envelope was pale pink, the handwriting painfully familiar. She said she was sorry, that she had changed, that she needed help. I didn't open it. I dropped it into the trash without a second thought. Some endings don't need to be rewritten. I still see Evelyn every Sunday. We cook together. Talk about Noah, not the version who lied, but the little boy she once knew. The one who collected rocks and named squirrels. She tells me stories that soften the jagged edges. I let them. Yesterday, I packed the last of his things. A few went to charity. The rest, to a storage unit I'll probably forget exists. When I looked at myself in the mirror this morning, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked free. I lost the family I was born into, but I found one I chose. And maybe, just maybe, that's the only kind that ever truly lasts.